Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, written by himself. Chapter 16. I frequently have been asked how I felt when I found myself in a free state. I never have been able to answer that question to my satisfaction. I felt the highest excitement that I ever have experienced. In writing to a dear friend immediately after my arrival in New York, I said that I felt like someone who had escaped the den of hungry lions. However, this state of mind soon subsided. I still could be captured and taken back to slavery's tortures. This thought filled me with anxiety. Even worse was the great loneliness that overcame me. I was a stranger in the midst of thousands of people. I was afraid to speak to anyone. Speaking to the wrong person might place me in the hands of money-loving kidnappers whose business it was to lie in wait for fugitive slaves. I adopted the motto, trust no one. I saw an enemy in every white and a cause for distrust in nearly every black. Thank heaven, I remained in this sad situation only a short time. I was relieved from it by David Ruggles, whose kindness I'll never forget. I am glad for this opportunity to express the love and gratitude that I feel toward him. David now is blind and in need of the same kindness that he generously showed to others. I had been in New York only a few days when he found me and kindly took me to his boarding house. He was deeply involved in the cases of a number of fugitive slaves. Though watched and hemmed in on almost every side, he was more than a match for his enemies. Soon after I went to David, he asked me where I wanted to go. He believed that it was unsafe for me to stay in New York. I told him that I was a caulker and would like to go where I could get work. I thought of going to Canada, but he advised me to go to New Bedford, Massachusetts, thinking that I would be able to find work there. At this time, Anna Murray, a free woman who was my intended wife, came to New York. I had written to her immediately after my arrival asking her to come. A few days after she arrived, we were married. After the wedding, with a gift of $5 from David, we boarded a steamboat bound for Newport on our way to New Bedford. When we arrived in New Bedford, we were directed to the house of Nathan Johnson. He and his wife were most kind and hospitable and took a lively interest in our welfare. They truly deserved the name of abolitionists. We now began to feel safe and started to prepare ourselves for the duties and responsibilities of a life of freedom. At breakfast on our first morning in New Bedford, the Johnsons asked me what name I wanted to use. My mother had named me Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. Long ago, I had stopped using my two middle names, so I generally was known as Frederick Bailey. When I had reached New York, I had changed my name to Frederick Johnson, but there were so many Johnsons in New Bedford that I now preferred some other name. I gave Nathan the privilege of choosing a new surname for me. He had just been reading Sir Walter Scott's poem, The Lady of the Lake, so he suggested that I adopt the name of its hero, Douglass. From that time on, I have been called Frederick Douglass. New Bedford's general appearance greatly surprised me. While a slave, I had formed a mistaken impression of living conditions in the North. I had supposed that Northerners possessed few of the comforts and none of the luxuries that slaveholders enjoy, because Northerners own no slaves. I had supposed that they lived like non-slaveholding white Southerners, who are exceedingly poor. I had expected Northerners to be rough, uneducated people living in harsh simplicity. On my first full day in New Bedford, I visited the wharves where I witnessed the strongest proofs of wealth. There were many ships of the finest model, best condition, and largest size. I was walled in by massive warehouses filled with every necessity and comfort. Almost everyone seemed to be working, but quietly, in contrast to the situation in Baltimore shipyards. I heard no loud songs from the men loading and unloading ships, no noisy oaths or curses from the workmen. I saw no whipping of men, yet all the work seemed to proceed smoothly. Every man appeared to understand his work and do it with a sober, cheerful determination, that indicated a sense of his own dignity. From the wharves, I strolled around the town, gazing with wonder and admiration at the splendid churches, beautiful homes, and finely cultivated gardens. Everywhere was an amount of wealth, comfort, and refinement, such as I never had seen in slave-holding Maryland. Everything looked clean, new, and beautiful. I saw no dilapidated houses with poverty-stricken residents, no half-naked children and barefoot women such as I customarily had seen in Maryland. The people looked healthier, happier, and more able than any I ever had seen. For once, I could see extreme wealth without being saddened by seeing extreme poverty alongside it. To me, however, the most astonishing and interesting thing was the condition of the blacks. Like me, many of them had escaped to New Bedford from slavery. I found many who had been free less than 7 years but were living in finer houses and enjoying more of life's comforts than the average Maryland slaveholder. My friend, Nathan Johnson, lived in a neater house, dined at a better table, read more newspapers, and better understood the nation's moral, religious, and political character than 9/10 of the slaveholders in Talbot County, Maryland. Yet Nathan was a working man. His hands were hardened by toil, as were those of his wife. I found the blacks much more spirited than I had expected. They shared a determination to protect one another from bloodthirsty kidnappers. Soon after my arrival, I heard a story that illustrated this spirit. A free black and a fugitive slave were on unfriendly terms. The freeman was heard threatening to tell the runaway's master where to find the fugitive. Immediately, the black community called a meeting to discuss business of importance. They invited the freeman. At the meeting, the people appointed an old religious gentleman as chairman. This gentleman offered a prayer and then said, "Friends, we have got him here. I recommend that you young men take him outside and kill him." A number of men bolted at the freeman, but others stopped them. The betrayer escaped and has not been seen in New Bedford since. 3 days after my arrival, I found employment helping to load a ship with barrels of oil. It was new, dirty, and hard work for me, but I did it with a glad heart and willing hand. I was my own master. Only those who have been slaves can understand the joy that I felt. For the first time, my earnings were my own. No Huall stood ready to rob me of them. I worked with pleasure that I never had experienced before. I was working for myself and my new wife. A new existence had begun. When I finished that job, I looked for work as a caulker, but there was prejudice among the white caulkers, and they refused to work with me. Unable to work at my trade, I prepared to do any kind of work that I could get. Nathan kindly lent me his saw and carpentry horse, and I soon had plenty of jobs. There was no work too dirty or hard. I was ready to saw wood, shovel coal, sweep chimneys, or roll oil barrels. I did all of this for nearly 3 years before I became known to the anti-slavery world. About 4 months after I arrived in New Bedford, I started subscribing to The Liberator. I read this newspaper from week to week with deeper feelings than I can describe. It became my meat and drink. It set my soul on fire. Its sympathy for my fellow slaves, denunciations of slaveholders, exposures of slavery, and powerful attacks on slavery defenders thrilled me. The Liberator introduced me to the principles, activities, and spirit of the anti-slavery movement. I took up the cause. I could do only a little, but I did it joyfully. I was happiest when attending an anti-slavery meeting. I seldom said much at the meetings because what I wanted to say was said better by others. But at an anti-slavery convention in Nantucket on August 11, 1841, I felt strongly moved to speak. William C. Coffin, who had heard me speak at a Black People's meeting in New Bedford, encouraged me to do so. I was hesitant. I still thought of myself as a slave. The idea of speaking to whites intimidated me. But after I had spoken a few moments, I spoke freely and with ease. From that time on, I have devoted myself to pleading the cause of my fellow slaves. I leave it to those acquainted with my efforts to decide my degree of success.